A great Bostonian named Tip O'Neill once said that all politics is local, and I'd like to believe that all streaming is local or should be. And there was another Bostonian, Chet Kanoja, who tried to do something really brilliant in 2008, Aereo, and was slammed by Barry Diller. My question to you is, why don't we have easier ways for local product, even hyper-local content, to make it to devices? Jim, what do you think?
Well, the primary reason is because the major networks control internet distribution these days, because the FCC has not deemed internet to be on the same par as cable, satellite, and phone. Although I should say, not to put it on them, they voted on it 6 years ago. Very interesting story about that, which I won't go into, but it didn't pass, but it's still around, and they may vote on it again. But the bottom line is that it flipped the whole industry, because instead of stations, local stations, negotiating with distributors, internet distributors, you had to now negotiate not only with the local stations, but the major networks in New York and LA. That is an almost impossible task, and so therefore they've sort of kept what I call the broadcast bundle. I think people want all channels, including the local Korean religious cooking programs, right, and all that, and that sort of stymied the whole thing. But slowly but surely, folks like us and others are bringing the broadcast bundle onto the internet, and in a legal way. Aereo unfortunately took an illegal path and was shut down, but there are legal ways to do it.
Right, and you and Rob worked most recently on something that, Rob, I want you to talk about and really give your perspective from what you're doing.
Well, my background is broadcasting, as you brought
right
up. Tribune, that was one big happy company, then it was two very unhappy companies, and then we got 8. And that plays along into what Jim was saying on the whole localized thing, is you also don't deal with independent stations anymore. Right. And so you got the gatekeepers. Nexstar is worried about keeping CBS and Fox and NBC happy. They don't care about their local channels being local, right, for lack of a better term. One of the things, and like I said, I've got a pretty strong broadcasting background in working this new news organization now, but one of my firmest beliefs is that, as you said, local news should be local. And so one of my pet projects, and something Jim and I have been working on a couple years now, is like where I grew up at in western Kansas, we used to have a TV station that had news, weather, sports locally. Well, about the time I was in high school, it got bought by a company out of Wichita. Wichita is 350 miles away from Hayes. And as the years have progressed, they don't even get a news break out of Hayes now. Everything comes from Wichita, which whether that's fine, but nobody cares about the latest murder in Wichita that lives 350 miles away in Hayes, Kansas. So back in the day, to start a TV station, millions, hundreds of millions to $1 billion just to put the tower up. You can do it with a phone now and do a fairly professional setup. So Jim's distribution and me working on working with journalists and studio space, and we tried it in one community. Jim doesn't like the word fail. I don't either. We learned a lot from it. We've got a lot of best practices in our head. We're going to try it again, but we were active for a year in Kokomo, weren't we? Kokomo, Indiana, which has never had a news bureau. And much like the whole Hayes situation, the only time you ever hear about Kokomo on Indianapolis news, once again going to that word, is when there's a murder in Kokomo, which happens about once every 2 months, compared to 6 a night in Indianapolis. But it's always a bigger deal for some reason for Kokomo to have one. But it's the only time they're ever mentioned on the news. So we tried it in Kokomo. We did work with the mayor, the police departments, and was getting some pretty good stories out of it. As I said, we learned a lot of best practices, and if Jim's willing, we're probably going to try it again.
Well, it's the notion that we had was expanding the fairly narrow vision of Aereo, and after that Localized, to keeping the broadcast bundle together on the internet.
Right.
Serving it through our own app, but more importantly, serving it through third-party apps, and add dynamic ad insertion to it, et cetera. And then in another part of the app, we put hyper-local channels, high schools, local news, local, music venue channels and things like that. And the whole idea is tie the community together. If some parent is watching the women's volleyball game from their local high school, right, they're going to switch over and watch the broadcast channels, because that whole broadcast experience of discovering and channel change, trust me, people love that still, because it's a nice different from all those boxes you're dealing with on every other app on your connected TV. So we look at it as a way to tie the communities together and get more money for broadcasters.